Small fists hit the steel door over and over hard enough to split the skin. A boy stood on the cold concrete barefoot, his knuckles already bleeding. He did not stop. He hit the door again.
Move.
And again.
Right behind
the
you.
sound carried into the
Stay
building
sharp.
behind
Eyes
it like
open.
a hammer on
Got
a bell.
Let's go.
Thin and sharp and impossible to ignore. Behind the door
Come on,
chairs
just one hand,
scraped
I can
across the
play.
concrete floor.
This ain't a kid's game.
Boots hit the
Stakes are
ground.
high.
I know.
A
I
deadbolt
watched you.
turned
I'm
with
ready.
a heavy final sound,
Kid's
and the
got
door
guts.
cracked
All right, one
open
hand.
3 inches. A
Listen,
chain
kid,
pulled tight
this
across
world
the
is
gap.
rough. You gotta be smart.
One eye
I
looked
know,
down,
but I'm not scared.
then 2
Good.
men,
But fear
then
keeps you
3.
sharp. Stay close to
All
us.
of them
He's
staring
right,
at a
kid. We got
boy
your
no
back.
older than
Hello.
8 years old, shaking, no shoes. A dead flashlight gripped so tight in his small fist that his fingers had gone white around it. He looked up at them. He did not flinch.
This
He did
matches
not
the
cry.
intel. Yeah.
His
but
name
who's the
was
extra
Silas
guy?
Brennan,
Not sure.
and he
The
said
money's all here,
5
though.
words that changed
Good. Let's
everything
recount it.
about the night that was
Right.
already
We're
underway.
close.
Please, my sister's in the trunk. The men behind the door went still. The kind of still that trained soldiers go when a round cracks overhead, and they do not yet know from which direction it came.
This was never the
Nobody
deal.
breathed for a full
Plans
second.
change. We adapt.
Nobody
Adapt.
moved.
This is
Then
betrayal.
the chain slid
Survival.
back.
Get in.
I'm not
The door
going.
that Silas
Stay.
Brennan had been
You're
beating
lost.
on
We'll
was
see.
not a
You'll
regular door.
regret this.
It was reinforced steel bolted into a concrete frame set into the front of a low, windowless building on the edge of a farm road that ran north out of the valley toward nothing. The lot in front of the building was full of Harleys parked in a tight angled row under a single yellow bulb chrome, catching the light like the edges of knives. This was the clubhouse of the Iron Serpents, a Hells Angels chapter out of the Central Valley, California. 30 years rooted into the dirt of that county, not weekend riders, not the kind of men who wore leather vests for show and rode to pancake breakfasts on Sundays. These were men who had done hard prison time and buried friends in the ground and knew how to make problems disappear without raising their voices. They ran that stretch of highway the way a man runs his own backyard, and the people who lived nearby had learned not to ask questions. And at 3 o'clock in the morning on a cold Thursday in November, they had been doing what they always did. Sitting around a long wooden table under bad fluorescent light, drinking from bottles that did not need labels, playing cards, not bothering anyone who did not bother them first. The man who opened the door was called Wade Thornton. The patch on his vest said Hatchet, a nickname he had earned a long time ago and never been able to shake. He was the chapter president, big in a way that had nothing to do with gyms, big the way a man gets when he has spent 3 decades hauling engine blocks and swinging sledgehammers and breaking things that needed to be broken. Hands like catcher's mitts, a beard that hit his chest, a scar above his left eye that ran up into the hairline, thin and pale and old. He had been riding with the Serpents since he was 19. He had been running the chapter for the last 11 years. In all that time, he had not been a man who moved fast for anyone. He did not scare. He did not startle. He had seen enough of the world to know that most threats announce themselves long before they arrive, and the ones that do not are already too late to run from. But when he looked down and saw the boy standing on hit concrete with those cut-up feet and that dead flashlight, something shifted behind his eyes. Only for a second. He did not show it to the men behind him. He did not need to. Every man in that room had been reading Wade's face for years, and every one of them saw that second register and understood what it meant. Something was very wrong. Behind Wade stood Rune Callahan, shorter, thicker, built like a fire hydrant that had been welded to a set of shoulders. Rune was the sergeant at arms, which was a fancy club title for a simple job. Rune handled threats to the club. He handled them quickly, and he handled them quietly, and he did not lose sleep afterward. Right now, his right hand was already resting on the grip of a pistol tucked into the waistband of his jeans. Because a child showing up at 3 in the morning at a place like this did not make sense. It smelled like a setup. It smelled like federal agents running a soft operation to get that door to open. Or worse, a rival club using a kid as bait, the oldest trick in the book because no man with a soul could turn a barefoot child away. Behind Rune stood Briggs Holloway, older than a Vermectin, close to 60, graying ponytail, a faded anchor tattoo on his forearm from a life he had lived somewhere else before the club ever had him. He was the pragmatist of the chapter, the one who always did the math before he did anything else. He was watching Silas not like a man looking at a child, but like a man looking at a problem. And behind Briggs stood a prospect named Cade Whitman, still young enough to be scared of the wrong things, who would be told to stay and watch the door while the others went out into the dark. Wade crouched down, slowly, the way you would crouch in front of a frightened dog. "Where did you come from, son?" Silas pointed behind him, into the dark, past the chain-link fence, past the gravel lot, toward the two-lane farm road that ran north into fields and irrigation ditches and the bones of old equipment rusting under the stars. "Who brought you here?" "Nobody." Wade's eyes narrowed. "I walked." Rune shook his head from behind Wade's shoulder. "No way. Nearest house out that way is 4 miles. 5, maybe." But the boy's feet were telling the story for him. Wade looked down at them, black on the bottom, cut in half a dozen places, gravel embedded in the soft skin between his toes, a thin trail of blood on the concrete where he had been standing. You could not fake feet like that. You could not send a trained actor or a planted informant to knock on a door like this with feet like that. This boy had walked, for a long time, in the cold, with nothing on him but a thin t-shirt and a pair of pajama pants that had been printed with blue race cars when they were new and were now faded almost to gray. "My sister," Silas said again. His voice was steady. It was the voice of a child who had run out of room to be afraid. "She's in the trunk of the car. Please." Wade looked up at Rune. Rune looked at Briggs. Briggs looked at nothing because Briggs was already running the numbers in his head, and the numbers were bad. Now here's the thing about those men in that moment. Every single one of them in that clubhouse had a reason to shut the door and walk away. They had outstanding warrants in 2 states. They had products stashed in a safe in the back room that a federal judge would have been very interested to see. They had weapons that were not registered to them and cash that had never been reported to anyone. Letting a child into the building was a risk none of them needed. And following that child out into the dark at 3 a.m. was worse. It could be an ambush. It could be a wire. It could be the beginning of the end of every small freedom those men still had in the world. But Wade Thornton reached behind him and grabbed his jacket off the back of a folding chair. He zipped it up to his throat. He pulled on a pair of worn leather gloves from the pocket. He looked at Rune and said one word: "Show me." Rune nodded and moved. He pulled a second gun from a lockbox on the wall and handed it to Briggs. Briggs took it without a word. Cade Whitman, the prospect, stayed by the door as ordered, and you could see in his young face that he was already praying for the first time in a long time. Wade turned back to the boy. "You lead." Silas did not need to be told twice. He turned and walked back into the dark. "Before we follow them out into the cold, before we see what was waiting for them in that ditch, you need to understand something about how this night began. Because the part that really matters did not start with a fist on a door at 3 a.m. It started 7 hours earlier in a small rented house 12 miles south of that clubhouse, where a woman named Maren Brennan was setting a kitchen timer. Maren was 34 years old. She had dark brown hair pulled back in a plain ponytail and a thin scar on her jawline that she had earned at 14 from a fall off a bicycle, and she wore reading glasses that she had bought at a drugstore the year before. She was the kind of woman you would walk past in a grocery store and never notice. That was on purpose. Invisibility had been her profession for the last 2 years, and she had gotten very good at it. Before she had been invisible, she had been a forensic accountant, which is a long way of saying that her job had been looking at numbers until the numbers told her what men had tried to hide. She had been good at it. She had been very good at it. She had worked for a regional firm in Fresno for 6 years, and then she had gone independent, and then because she was the kind of woman who followed threads all the way to the end, she had found a number that she was not supposed to find. A number attached to a name she was not supposed to know. And from that name, she had started pulling on a thread that had piece by piece unraveled something much larger than she had expected. The name at the end of that thread was Roderick Hollister. People called him Rook. He was a man who had been officially dead for 6 years. Maren knew he was not dead. She had known for 22 months. Now in the small rented house, she was moving through her kitchen with the calm efficiency of a woman who had rehearsed every step of the next hour 100 times in her head. The kitchen timer on the counter was set to 45 minutes. It was a cheap plastic thing shaped like a tomato. She had bought it at a thrift store because she did not trust her phone to wake her up if the phone's battery died, and she had learned a long time ago not to trust things that needed batteries. In the back bedroom, her 2 children were asleep. Silas, 8 years old, curled on his side with his mouth open, breathing the deep, steady breath of a boy who had no idea what was coming. Hazel, 5 years old, sprawled on her back with one arm flung above her head, a stuffed rabbit wedged into the crook of her elbow. The rabbit was missing an eye. Hazel had cried for 3 days when the eye fell off until Maren had sewn a new button over the empty socket, and since then Hazel had been willing to trust the rabbit again. Maren stood in the doorway of their room for a long moment looking at them. Then she went back to the kitchen and did the thing she had hoped she would never have to do. She lifted the cover off the heating grate under the dining room window, and she pulled out a small plastic box that had been taped to the inside of the vent. The box contained 3 things: a folded piece of paper with a hand-drawn map on it, a small black USB drive, the kind you could buy in a 3-pack at any office store, and a key copper-colored and scratched on a plain steel ring. She put the USB drive into the pocket of a worn pair of running shoes that were sitting by the back door. She slid it deep into the toe of the left shoe, pressed it flat against the insole, and pulled the laces tight. Then she went back to the bedroom. "Silas, baby." She shook her son's shoulder gently. He opened his eyes. He did not sit up right away. He looked at her the way a child looks at a parent when he knows, even half asleep, that something is different. "We're going to do the thing we practiced." Silas's eyes cleared all at once. He sat up. He did not speak. He did not ask questions. He did not cry or complain or ask if this was real. Because Maren had drilled him on this for months. Not in a scary way, in a careful way. The same way she had once at his age been drilled on fire drills at school. You did not panic. You did not forget. You moved through the steps one at a time, and you did not stop until you got to the end. "Do you remember the road?" He nodded. "Tell me." "Mothon Cooper Road, right at the silo with the pin on the side, straight until I hit the gravel lot with the motorcycles. Knock on the door. Tell them I need the man with the scar over his left eye." "What do you say?" Silas took a breath the way she had taught him to so that his voice would come out steady. "My sister's in the trunk." Maren closed her eyes for a second. Then she opened them and put her hands on her son's face. Her palms were cold. She did not let them shake. "You say exactly that. Not one word more until he asks. Do you understand me?" "Yes." "And what do you tell him about the bag in the car?" "To open the canvas bag. And the phone. It will ring. Answer it." "Good boy." She kissed his forehead. Then she went to Hazel. Hazel was harder. Hazel was 5. You could not drill a 5-year-old on a plane like this, not really, because a 5-year-old did not have the wiring yet to understand that the world contained men like Roderick Hollister. Maren had not tried. What she had done instead was teach Hazel one simple sentence. A sentence Hazel could repeat if she got separated from her brother, if she got scared, if she did not know what to do. It was not a useful sentence in a practical way. It was a magic word, the way a magic word is useful to a 5-year-old. A rope for a small hand to hold on to in the dark. Maren bent down and whispered the sentence to her daughter one more time. Hazel mumbled it back in her sleep. Close enough. Then Maren went to her bedroom closet and knelt on the floor and pulled back the carpet in the corner. Underneath was a small recessed cavity in the wood, and in the cavity was a second USB drive identical to the first, and a folded sheet of paper on which she had written in her own handwriting a list of names. 27 names. Judges, police officers, 2 county supervisors, a federal prosecutor, the names of the men who had been protecting Roderick Hollister for the last 6 years, the names of the men who were going to hang when that list finally saw daylight. She put the second USB drive into a different hiding place. She did not tell you where. Even her children did not know. That second drive was the thing that would keep the whole machine turning if she did not survive the night. The kitchen timer on the counter dinged. 45 minutes had passed. Maren stood up. She walked to the front of the house. She drew back the edge of the curtain with one finger. A black SUV was parked at the end of the driveway with its headlights off. As she watched the second vehicle, a panel van pulled in behind it and killed its engine. They were here. She let the curtain fall back. Then she did something that did not make sense unless you understood the whole of what she had been building for 2 years. She did not run. She did not grab her children and flee out the back door. She walked to the front hall. She made sure her shoes were sitting by the back door where Silas could find them. She put her own shoes on, not the running shoes, a pair of worn leather flats that she had chosen specifically because they looked like the shoes of a woman who was not planning anything. She sat down on the bottom step of her own staircase. She folded her hands in her lap, and she waited, because the whole plan depended on her being taken. She had been running the numbers for 2 years the same way she had run numbers for her old job, and the numbers only worked if Roderick Hollister got his hands on her. He had to believe he was in control. He had to believe he had won, because only then would he move. Only then would he come out of whatever hole he had been hiding in for 6 years and travel in person in real time, across real distances where real witnesses could see him, and real recordings could be made, and the dead man could finally be made dead in a way that would stick. The front door burst inward a minute later. Splinters of wood flew. 3 men came through it fast and hard. The first one stopped when he saw her sitting on the stairs. He had not expected her to be sitting there. They never did. He raised a gun and pointed it at her chest. Maren did not move. She did not speak. The second man swept past her into the house toward the back bedroom. Maren had left the bedroom door open because she wanted him to find the children quickly. She wanted him not to look anywhere else. "Clean," he called out. "2 kids asleep. Get them up." "She armed?" the first man asked. Maren shook her head slowly. He patted her down anyway. His hands were rough. She did not flinch. He found nothing. She had made sure there was nothing to find. From the back bedroom came the sound of Hazel starting to cry, a thin, confused sound, and then a man's voice telling her to shut up, and then Silas's voice steady, saying something Maren could not quite hear, saying probably what she had taught him to say to his sister in this exact moment. "It's okay, Hazel. It's just the thing we practiced." The first man pulled her to her feet. "Where is he?" she asked. Her voice was flat. She already knew the answer. She wanted him to say it out loud. "Outside, waiting." She walked ahead of them, out the broken front door, into the cold November night, across the crunching grass of her own front yard. A tall, thin man was leaning against the hood of the SUV with his hands in his pockets. He did not straighten up when she came out. He did not smile. He just looked at her with the patient expression of a man who had been waiting a long time for this particular meeting. Roderick Hollister. Rook, 6 years in the ground and still standing in front of her. "Maren," he said. "Roderick, you look tired. You look alive." He smiled then, just with the corner of his mouth. "Funny thing about that," he said. Then he pushed off the hood and walked past her and opened the back door of the SUV and gestured for her to get in. She got in. She did not look back at the house. She did not look back at the van where a moment later her children were being loaded into the back like cargo. She did not cry, and she did not beg, and she did not make any of the sounds that Roderick Hollister would have expected a mother to make, because she had decided 2 years ago that when this moment came, she would not give him a single thing he wanted from her. Not a tear, not a plea, not 1 inch of the satisfaction he thought he had coming. The SUV started up. Rook slid into the back seat beside her. The van followed. They pulled out onto the county road and turned north. Maren looked out the window at the dark fields rolling by and thought about the tomato-shaped timer on her kitchen counter, which had done its run and was now lying silent on a surface no one was ever going to come back to. She thought about the running shoes by the back door. She thought about the map her son had memorized. She thought about the canvas bag in the trunk of the car. Rook would eventually put his own registration sticker on without realizing the bag had been packed weeks ago by somebody who knew exactly what she was doing. Every single piece was already in motion. Back on the 2-lane road north of the clubhouse at 2:45 in the morning, Silas Brennan had been walking for 2 hours. His feet were past the point of hurting. That had happened about a mile back. Somewhere around the 2nd mile, the pain in his feet had shifted from being sharp and specific to being a dull, warm humming, and he had understood in the way that children sometimes understand things, without being told that this was not a good sign. But he had kept walking because his mother had told him to keep walking, and because if he stopped, he would start thinking about Hazel in the trunk of that car, and if he started thinking about Hazel in the trunk of that car, his legs would stop working. The road was empty. He had seen 2 sets of headlights in 2 hours, and both times he had done what his mother had taught him, which was step off into the weeds on the shoulder and crouch down until the lights passed. Because Mom had said the wrong car could come looking for him, and he did not know which cars were wrong and which cars were right, so all cars were wrong. The dead flashlight in his hand had died 20 minutes into the walk. He kept carrying it anyway. It felt like a thing you were supposed to hold on to, a small, heavy thing in the dark. He had cried once, right at the beginning when the tall man had opened the trunk and let him out and pointed at the road and said with a strange, gentle voice that did not match his face that Silas had 1 hour, and it was a game and his sister was going to stay in the trunk until the game was over. Silas had cried then. He had not been able to help it, but he had stopped crying within a few steps because his mother had told him that when the bad thing happened, he had to save his crying for later. There would be time to cry later, she had said. Right now, there was only time to walk. So he had walked, and now finally ahead of him in the dark, he could see a single yellow bulb over a door, and underneath the bulb, a row of motorcycles, chrome catching the light like the edges of knives. He had found them. He put a small hand against the steel door and took one breath, and then he started to hit the door with his bleeding knuckles. A long time later, after the men came out and followed him back down the road, after Wade Thornton pried the trunk open with a bar from his jacket, and a girl no bigger than a bundle of laundry came out of it with tape on her mouth and her wrist after. All of that, there was a moment when Silas stopped being an 8-year-old boy, completing his mother's plan, and started being an 8-year-old boy whose sister had just been pulled out of a trunk in the cold. He climbed up onto the bumper. He reached for Hazel. She grabbed him and buried her face in his neck and did not let go. And Silas held her with both arms. He was shaking. Not from the cold, from everything else. Wade stood beside the car and watched them for a second. His jaw was set very hard. Then he turned to Briggs. "Check the car." Briggs nodded and moved to the driver's side. He opened the door. He leaned in with a small flashlight and began to work through the interior methodically the way a man works who has done this 100 times before. Wade watched him. Rune stood by the road with his pistol drawn, scanning the dark because whoever had put that girl in that trunk had not gotten there on foot and was not far away. "Wallet," Briggs said. "Registration, cell phone, canvas bag in the back seat." "Bring it all." Briggs brushed it. He handed the registration to Wade first. Wade unfolded it under the beam of Briggs's flashlight. He read the name. Then he read it a second time because the first reading had not made sense. Then he read it a third time. Roderick Hollister. Rook. Wade stood there for what felt to Briggs like a very long moment, holding the folded slip of paper between two thick fingers, and the look on his face was something Briggs had not seen on Wade Thornton's face in the 11 years he had been riding under him. "Wade," Briggs said quietly. Wade did not answer. "Wade, that name. I know what the name says." "Wade, he's been in the ground for 6 years." "No, he hasn't." Wade folded the registration and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. He looked at the car in the ditch, the way a man looks at a snake that had crawled into his kitchen. Rook Hollister had been a connect. 6 years ago, he had been the middleman between the Iron Serpents and a network of buyers up north. He had eaten at the long wooden table in the clubhouse. He had shaken Wade's hand more times than either of them could count. He had laughed at Briggs's jokes. He had been for a period of about 2 years as close to a member as a non-member could get without taking the patch. And then one day Rook had vanished, along with $80,000 of the club's money. The chapter had spent 3 months looking for him. They had called every contact they had. They had reached out to every chapter from San Diego to Portland. They had found nothing. Not a rumor, not a whisper. It was as if Roderick Hollister had walked through a door and closed it behind him. Most of the members had eventually decided that Rook was dead. A few had decided that the club had made him dead, and nobody was talking about it. Nobody had ever been sure. Nobody had ever asked out loud because some things were not asked in the clubhouse. And over the years, the name had stopped being said entirely. 6 years of silence, a closed file, a sealed door, and now his car was in a ditch in the middle of the night with a 5-year-old girl locked in the trunk. Wade looked down at the canvas bag in Briggs's other hand. "Bring it inside, all of it. Wake the kids up long enough to walk, Rune." Rune turned. "Carry the girl." "Carry the Rune came over. He tucked his gun away. He bent down to where Silas was still clutching Hazel against his chest on the bumper of the car, and he did something that none of them would ever talk about afterward, which was that he took off his own leather jacket and wrapped it around the little girl as gently as a man can do anything. Then he lifted her into his arms. she weighed nothing. She was so light that for a second Rune Callahan, the sergeant at arms of the Iron Serpents, a man who had put 3 men in the hospital with his bare hands before his 30th birthday, looked down at the small shape in his arms, and his face did something he had not intended. He turned away so the others would not see it. They walked back to the clubhouse in the cold. Silas walked beside Wade. Their shadows moved together along the shoulder of the road, a very big man and a very small boy. And Wade did not talk, and Silas did not talk. And the night was so quiet around them that you could hear the girl's small breathing from where Rune carried her ahead of them. Inside the clubhouse, they laid Hazel on the old couch in the corner under the window. Somebody Briggs maybe pulled a wool blanket down from a storage closet and covered her up with it. Somebody else, Cade the prospect, went into the kitchen and started heating water for tea because that was the only thing he could think to do. Briggs set the canvas bag on the long wooden table without opening it. Nobody opened it yet. Nobody looked at it. It sat there like a thing waiting. Wade knelt down next to the couch. "What's your sister's name, son?" "Hazel." "Hazel, that's a pretty name." Silas did not answer. He was sitting on the edge of the couch with his hand on Hazel's blanket, as if he was afraid that if he let go, she would disappear. "What's your name, Silas?" "Silas. How old are you, Silas?" "8." "8. My son was 8 once, long time ago." He was keeping his voice low and even, the way you keep your voice around an animal that has been hurt badly. Rune stood a few feet behind him watching, saying nothing. Briggs had taken up a position by the front window and was looking out at the lot, which was his way of being useful. "Silas, can I ask you some questions?" A nod. "The man who put your sister in the trunk, did you see his face?" "Yes." "Was there more than one man?" A pause. "I think 2, maybe 3. One was driving." "Where's your mother, Silas?" "He took her." Wade's jaw worked. "Where did he take her?" "I don't know. He put her in another car, a van. He took us somewhere first, and then he moved her, and then he drove us out here and let me out." "He let you out on purpose," Silas nodded. "He told me it was a game. He said I had an hour. He said if I told anybody what he did, he would kill my mom." "And then what?" Silas looked up at Wade. His eyes were strange. They were not the eyes of an 8-year-old. They were the eyes of a child who had been given a bomb and had done the wrong and was now for the first time letting the weight of the job rest on him. "My mom told me what to do if the bad thing happened. I did what she told me." Wade's face did not move, but his hand, which had been resting on the arm of the couch, closed slowly into a fist. "What did she tell you to do, Sunbaiwa?" "She told me to come here. Here, to the men with the motorcycles. She told me the road. She said to ask for the man with the scar over his left eye." And Silas lifted his small hand, and without really meaning to, he reached up and almost touched Wade Thornton's face. He did not quite do it. His fingers hovered a few inches from Wade's eyebrow, from the scar. Wade went very still. "Your mother told you about me?" "Yes." "By name?" "She said the scar. She said the scar would be enough." Rune, standing behind them, spoke for the first time in 15 minutes. "Wade." Wade did not turn around. "She also told me about the bag." Silas pointed at the canvas bag on the table. "She said you need to open it. She said you need to see what's inside." Rune and Wade looked at each other across the room. Neither of them spoke for a long beat. Then Wade stood up slowly, the way a man stands up when his knees have started to go in his 50s, and he walked over to the long wooden table. Rune followed. Briggs turned from the window. Wade unzipped the canvas bag. Inside, stacked in thick manila file folders held together with rubber bands, were photographs and printed bank statements and photocopies of documents and handwritten notes in a small, precise handwriting that Wade did not recognize. He pulled out the top folder. He opened it on the table under the bad fluorescent light. The first photograph showed a judge. Wade knew the judge. Everybody in the valley knew the judge. He was shaking hands with a man in a dark suit outside a warehouse Wade also recognized. The second photograph showed a county sheriff's deputy accepting an envelope from a man Wade did not know. The third photograph showed 2 members of the county board of supervisors at a table in the back of a steakhouse, with a third man whose face Wade had not seen in 6 years, but which he recognized immediately as Roderick Hollister. Wade flipped faster, photograph after photograph, a federal prosecutor, a city councilman, a state senator, men Wade had read about in the newspaper, men who had appeared on local television. And then halfway down the stack, he stopped flipping, because the next photograph was of him, Wade Thornton, standing outside the same warehouse as the judge, 7 years ago by the date handwritten on the back, shaking the hand of a man in a suit Wade had not seen since. Rook Hollister was in the background of the photograph, looking directly at the camera, looking directly at the photographer, which meant Rook had known, which meant Rook had arranged it. 2 more photographs showed Rune, one showed Briggs, one showed a member who had died 2 years ago of a heart attack. Wade laid the photographs out on the table in a row. Nobody spoke. Rune Callahan sat down slowly in one of the folding chairs. Briggs Holloway was very, very still by the window. It was at exactly that moment that the cell phone inside the canvas bag began to ring. The sound was loud in the silent room. A plain ringtone, not a song, not a custom tone, just the factory default, a thin, insistent chirp that went on and on. Wade reached into his bag and pulled the phone out. The cracked screen lit up. The incoming number was unknown. No name, no area code he recognized. He looked at Rune. Rune gave the smallest nod. Wade Thornton, who had been the president of the Iron Serpents for 11 years, who had not taken an order from anyone in that time, except from his own conscience, pressed the green answer button and raised the cracked phone to his ear. The voice on the other end was a woman's voice. It was calm. It was tired in a specific way, not the tired of a woman who had been crying, but the tired of a woman who had been running on nothing but focus for many hours and was still focused. There was no fear in the voice at all. Wade had listened to a lot of voices in his life, and he knew the difference between a voice that had suppressed its fear and a voice that had already finished being afraid a long time ago. This was the second kind. "My name is Maren Brennan," the voice said. "Those are my children. I got free about 20 minutes ago. I'm walking. Please listen very carefully because I only have one chance to say this right." Wade opened his mouth and then closed it again. For the first time in 11 years as president of that clubhouse, he did not know what to say. The voice went on. "You have the bag, you have the photographs. You already know what's in them, so we don't have to talk about that. I know this is not a conversation you expected to have tonight. I know you're trying to figure out if I'm real, if this is a setup, and whether you should hang up and burn everything I just put in your hands. I'm going to save you some time. I'm real, it's not a setup. And you are not going to burn any of it because the man who took my children is coming to your clubhouse in the next 90 minutes. And the only way any of us walks out of this is if you do exactly what I tell you in exactly the order I tell you." Wade closed his eyes. Just for a second, the scar above his left eye was pulling tight in a way it did only when he was about to do something he could not take back. Then he opened his eyes. He looked at his sergeant at arms sitting in the folding chair. He looked at the 2 small shapes on the couch in the corner, the boy with his hand on his sister's blanket. He looked at the photograph spread across the table, and he said the first words he had said on a phone call with a woman he had never met in his entire life. "I'm listening." The voice on the other end of the phone did not waste time. It did not introduce itself twice. It did not ask if Wade was sitting down. It moved like a woman walking a tightrope in the dark, one careful word at a time, and every word landed exactly where it needed to land. "First thing," Maren Brennan said, "your sergeant at arms is standing next to you. The heavy one. Put me on speaker so he can hear this too." Wade's eyes flicked up at Rune Callahan. Rune was watching him from the folding chair with the patience of a man who had been reading Wade Thornton's face for 20 years and knew when something new had walked into the room. "How do you know he's here?" "Because you're the president and he's your shadow." "Put me on speaker, Wade. The clock is running." Wade pulled the cracked phone away from his ear and tapped the screen. The voice came out thin and tinny through the small speaker, but the steadiness of it filled the room anyway. "Sergeant, your name is Rune. I'm sorry we're meeting like this. I need you to do something in the next 60 seconds, and I need you not to ask why until after it's done." Rune sat forward in the folding chair. His jaw was set hard. "Go." Under the driver's seat of the car in the ditch, there is a small rectangular cavity cut into the frame, not the storage compartment. Under that, you have to push the whole seat forward and lift the carpet. There is a second USB drive down there wrapped in electrical tape. Get it. Don't plug it in. Don't even touch the metal contacts with bare fingers. Bring it back and put it on the table next to the bag. Rune did not hesitate. He stood up, pulled his jacket back on, and went out the front door at a walk that became a jog the moment he was past the threshold. Wade looked down in at the phone in his palm. How many of these do you have? Drives 3. One is in your clubhouse right now. One is under the car seat. The third is somewhere neither of us needs to talk about. As long as I am breathing, nobody is going to find the third one. If I stop breathing, it finds a federal prosecutor in Sacramento by the end of the business day. That is the safety net. That is not the weapon. The weapon is the one in the bag in front of you and the one Rune is walking to get right now. And what's on the weapon? Everything, Wade. The word means exactly what you think it means. Wade closed his eyes for a second. He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. It was the breathing of a woman who was moving, not sitting. There was wind behind her voice, the soft crunch of boots on hard dirt. She was walking somewhere steadily while she talked. Where are you right now, Maren? About 3 miles from the clubhouse, cutting across the old Brennan orchard. Not my family, no relation, same name by coincidence. There is a drainage ditch running north from the orchard that comes out about 400 yards behind your fence line. I will be at that fence in about 40 minutes if nothing goes wrong. How did you get free? I cut the zip tie on my wrist with a ceramic blade I had sewn into the inside heel of my left shoe 6 weeks ago. The blade is about 1.5 inches long and very, very sharp. I had been practicing reaching it with my fingers while my wrists were bound behind my back every night in my bathroom for the last 2 months. It took me a little over 3 minutes tonight. I had hoped it would take less. When you practice in a bathroom with no adrenaline, your fingers are steadier. Wade stared at the phone. You practiced being tied up. I practiced a lot of things, Wade. Outside, the front door banged open. Rune came back in fast. He was carrying something small in his right hand, wrapped in black electrical tape exactly as Maren had described, and he crossed to the long wooden table and set it down next to the canvas bag with the careful motion of a man setting down a piece of unexploded ordnance. Got it. He has it, Wade said into the phone. Good. Do not plug it into anything. Do not open the tape. It needs to be exactly as it is when I get there. Wade, I need to keep talking. I am walking as fast as I can, but I am not going to be there for a while, and there are things you need to know before he comes, and he is coming. When? Soon. He was 30 minutes behind me when I left the van. It took him time to realize I was gone. By now, he has called his people, rerouted his route, and he is coming to your clubhouse because he believes the canvas bag is at your clubhouse, and he believes my children are at your clubhouse, and he believes I am still tied to a folding chair in a storage unit off Route 9. He is wrong about one of those things. That one mistake is the only edge we have, and I am going to spend it all in the next hour. Rune looked at Wade across the table. She has an edge, Rune said quietly enough that the phone did not pick it up. She has more than an edge, Wade said. I think she has been building this since before we knew there was a building to build. 12 minutes earlier, Maren Brennan had been flat on her stomach in a drainage ditch 1/2 mile from where she was now, with cold mud soaking through the front of her jacket and both hands pressed flat against the rotting boards of an old irrigation culvert, listening to 2 men walk past her in the dark. She had been out of the van for 20 minutes by then. The first 10 minutes had been the hardest. The ceramic blade had come out of her shoe cleanly the way it was supposed to. The zip tie had parted on the third sawing motion. But the back of the van had been locked from the outside, and Rook Hollister had posted a single man to watch her through a small square of grating in the rear door, and Maren had spent 4 minutes pretending to be asleep while she worked out the exact angle she needed to come up from the floor of the van to be outside the man's sight line when he next glanced in. When his phone had buzzed and he had looked down at it, she had moved. She had pushed open the side cargo door, which Rook's man had not checked because the van was parked with the side door against a chain link fence, and you could not open the side door without first pulling the van away from the fence. Except you could if you were small enough, and if you did not mind the metal of the door scraping across your shoulder blades, and if you had been practicing in your driveway at night with a tape measure for 2 months until you knew the exact inch width of the gap that you could and could not fit through. Maren was small. Maren did not mind the metal. Maren had been practicing. She had dropped out of the van onto gravel, and crawled on her belly along the base of the chain-link fence until she reached a gap under the fence where a dog had dug a hole years ago, and nobody had ever filled it in. She had squeezed through the hole. She had stood up on the other side of the fence behind a line of dead sunflowers, and she had started walking, not running, walking. Because running at night in the cold across uneven ground with a body that was stiff from having been tied up for hours was the fastest way to twist an ankle. And a twisted ankle was the thing that would end the whole plan. 20 minutes later, when Rook's people had finally realized she was gone, the two of them had come out of the house that the van was parked beside and started sweeping the ground around the van with flashlight beams. And that was when Maren had gone flat in the drainage ditch and pressed her face into the rotting wood of the culvert and made herself as small and as still as she had ever made herself in her life. They had walked past her 12 feet to her right. The beam of one of their flashlights had swept across the top of the ditch, and she had watched the shadow of the beam crawl over the dead grass above her head and then keep moving. Neither of the men had thought to look down into the ditch, because the ditch was a ditch, and who hides in a ditch, and it was cold, and they were tired, and Rook had not been paying them enough to be as careful as they should have been. When their voices had gotten far enough away, Maren had climbed out of the ditch and started moving north. That was when the phone had started working again. She had been carrying a small, prepaid phone inside her bra since the morning. Rook's men had patted her down twice, but they had patted her down the way men pat down women. They expect to find weapons on. Not the way men pat down women, they expect to find communications on. And the small prepaid phone had been sitting 3 inches from the heart of the woman they were about to lose control of, and they had never felt it once. She had dialed the number for the cracked phone in the canvas bag at 3:47 in the morning, and Wade Thornton had picked up on the second ring. Now on the line, she kept walking. "Wade, there is something on the second drive I need you to hear before he gets there." "What is it?" "There is a recording from September of last year, about 11 minutes long. It is a conversation between Roderick Hollister and a man whose voice you know very well. A man who has been drinking coffee in your clubhouse for the last 30 years. Wade went very still. "Say that again." "You heard me the first time, Wade. You are telling me that one of my men has been talking to Rook for 6 years, ever since the night he disappeared with $80,000. That money never went to Rook, Wade. Rook never took a dime of it. The money stayed in the valley. It stayed with the man who helped Rook disappear in exchange for his name being left out of every file Rook ever built. The agreement was simple. Help Rook vanish, keep the $80,000 as a signing bonus, and in return, your photograph never ends up in the bag you are currently looking at." Rune Callahan slowly turned his head and looked at the closed front door of the clubhouse. "Maren." "Yes, Wade." "Give me the name." "I think you already know the name, Wade. I think if you sit with it for 10 seconds, you will know the name. I am going to say it anyway because we do not have 10 seconds. The name is Briggs Holloway. He has been Rook Hollister's ears inside the Iron Serpents for 6 years. He is the reason Rook always has seemed to know things. He is the reason 3 deals went sideways in 2020 that should not have gone sideways. He is the reason one of your members had a heart attack 2 years ago that a good forensic pathologist would not have called a heart attack if the right person had asked the right questions. He is the reason I chose your chapter, Wade. Not the only reason, but part of it. Because I needed to know who the leak was before I walked in through your front door, and I needed you to hear the leak's voice in Rook's own office before I told you what I knew. The recording is on the drive Rune just brought in. Track 9, 11 minutes, 32 seconds. Wade Thornton did not say anything for a very long moment. Rune was watching his face. Finally, Wade lifted his eyes and looked at his sergeant at arms. "Rune, I heard her." "Get him." Rune stood up without a word. He did not reach for his gun. He did not need to. He walked to the hallway that led to the back of the clubhouse, and he disappeared into it. And the only sound in the main room for the next 30 seconds was the sound of Wade Thornton breathing very slowly through his nose, and the soft, papery sound of the sleeping children turning over once under the wool blanket on the couch. Then Rune came back. He was walking behind Briggs's Holloway. He was not touching Briggs. He did not need to. Briggs was walking the way a man walks when the man behind him has already said everything that needed to be said without saying a single word. Briggs stopped in front of the long wooden table. He looked at Wade. He looked at the phone on the table and the tiny speaker still live. And the woman's voice that was not speaking right now, but was listening on the other end of the line. Briggs Holloway was close to 60 years old. His ponytail was almost entirely gray. He had been riding with the Iron Serpents since he was 24. He had been through 2 wives and 3 hospital stays and 1 prison term of 14 months in the middle 80s for something he had done to protect a man who had not deserved the protection. He had buried his best friend in 1998. He had cried at the funeral. Wade had been standing next to him at the gravesite, and Wade had put a hand on his shoulder, and Briggs had never forgotten it. Wade was looking at him now across the long wooden table, and there was no hand on anybody's shoulder in the look. Briggs? Wade, is it true, Brennan? Briggs did not answer immediately. He stood there with his hands at his sides, and his weight shifted slightly back on his heels, the way a man stands when he is getting ready to take whatever is coming and does not want to flinch when it lands. His eyes moved from Wade to Rune and then back to Wade. How much did she tell you? Enough. She said the name. She said the recording is on the drive. She said you have been talking to him since the night he left. She said the money stayed with you. Tell me she is wrong, Briggs. I am not asking you to fight it. I am asking you to tell me she is wrong so I do not have to look at you the way I am about to look at you if she is right. Briggs Holloway closed his eyes. He kept them closed for what felt to everybody in the room like a very long time. When he opened them, there was something already broken behind the gray of them, and Wade saw it, and Wade's jaw tightened, and the scar above his left eye pulled pale against the skin around it. She is not wrong, Briggs said. The front room of the clubhouse went perfectly still. Briggs kept talking, not fast. He was not trying to get it out before it could be stopped. He was speaking the way a man speaks when he has rehearsed the sentences in the back of his own head 1,000 times over the course of 6 years and never believed he would have to say any of them out loud and now finally has to say it all of them at once. Rook came to me about a week before he disappeared. He said the feds had gotten close to him. He said he had an exit plan, but he needed $80,000 in cash to make it work. And he said that if he went down, a lot of names were going to go down with him, and one of those names was going to be his own, and one of those names was going to be mine. He said he had been careful about what he had in writing, but he had not been careful enough. He said he needed a friend inside the chapter to help him leave clean. He said once he was gone, once he was across state lines with a new name, all he needed from me was 1 phone call a month, just to let him know the chapter was not looking for him. He said it was a small thing, a tiny thing, a favor for a friend. Briggs paused. He swallowed. I took the $80,000 to him that night. I walked it into his office in a duffel bag. I handed it over. I shook his hand. I came back here the next morning, and I sat at this table and I drank coffee with you, Wade, and I told you I had no idea where Rook was, and you believed me, because there was no reason you should not have believed me. 30 years of riding together is a thing. I traded on it. I am not going to pretend I didn't. Wade had not moved. The 1 phone call a month, Briggs said, did not stay 1 phone call a month. Rook got greedy about 3 years in. He started asking me to mention things to him. Small things at first. Who was meeting with who? Which way certain conversations were going in the chapter. Nothing that seemed to matter. I told myself it did not matter because Rook was gone and none of it was going to hurt anybody. I told myself a lot of things, Wade. Briggs, I know. The member who died 2 years ago. The heart attack. Briggs closed his eyes again. I did not know Rook was going to do it. I did not know what he did. I told Rook in a phone call in April of that year that a certain member had started asking questions about where the old $80,000 had really gone. I told Rook it was nothing. I told Rook not to worry about it. And 3 weeks later, that member was dead, and the doctors said it was his heart, and I did not ask any more questions because I could not ask any more questions without the answer coming back at my own neck. I have lived with that for 2 years, Wade. I am not asking you to tell me I should not have lived with it. I am telling you I did. The phone on the table clicked very softly. Maren Brennan's voice came through the speaker quieter now. Wade, I'm here. I know how this looks. I know what a 30-year ride looks like. I am not here to tell you what to do about one of your own. That is not my job and it is not my right. But I need you to know one thing before you decide anything. I need both of you to know it. Briggs, listen to me. Briggs Holloway looked at the phone on the table. Yes. Rook did not keep you around because he needed information from the Iron Serpents. Rook had 10 other ways to get information from the Iron Serpents. He kept you around because you were a loose end that he controlled. As long as you were talking to him, you were never going to say anything about him to anyone else. That is why you are not in any of the photographs in that bag, Briggs. It is not because your name was left out of the files as a favor. It is because Rook was planning to put your name in a different file, one that is on a different drive, and hand it to a different set of people on a day of his choosing when he had decided you had served your purpose. You were not his friend. You were his insurance against a day that was coming for you anyway. I am telling you this so that when Wade makes whatever decision Wade is about to make, you understand that the 30-year ride is the thing you are losing tonight. And the only reason you got to keep it as long as you did was that a man you trusted was going to throw it into a fire the first time it became more convenient to burn it than to hold it. Briggs Holloway did not say anything. A single tear slid down the side of his face into the gray hair of his beard and stopped there. Wade Thornton stood up from the arm of the couch. He walked around the long wooden table. He walked until he was standing about 3 feet from Briggs Holloway, and he did not raise his voice, and he did not raise his hands, and he looked at his oldest friend in the chapter the way a man looks at a photograph of somebody who has already been gone for a long time. Briggs, yeah, Wade, you owe this club a debt. I am not going to put it in any other words than the words it actually is because you and I have known each other too long for anything softer than the true ones. The debt is not one I know how to collect tonight. There is not enough time tonight. Tonight I need you alive, and I need you on this ground because the man who is coming up that road is going to be here in less than an hour, and there is one rifle on the roof of this building, and the rifle is not going to hold itself. Briggs's head came up slightly. You want me on the roof? I want you on the roof. I want you to go up there right now with the long gun and the scope and the wind card, and I want you to lie flat on the tar paper, and I want you to put your eye to that scope, and I want you to not take it off the approach road for 1 second until Rook Hollister is either in custody or in the dirt. Do you understand me? Yes. You are going to pay a piece of your debt tonight, Briggs. You are going to pay it with the only thing I can still ask you to pay with. And if you live through the paying, we will talk about the rest of the debt after, and we will talk about it in a room where nobody is listening, and you are going to tell me everything else I need to know. All of it. Every piece, and then we are going to figure out what to do about the rest of your life. But not tonight. Tonight you go up the ladder. Briggs's mouth opened and closed. Then he nodded once, and his voice came out very small. I'm sorry, Wade. I know you are. I have known you for 30 years. Of course you are sorry. That does not fix it. That is not what sorry is for. Go get the rifle. Roon walked Briggs to the back of the clubhouse. They were gone for about 4 minutes. When Roon came back alone, Wade was sitting at the long wooden table with both of his big hands flat on the wood on either side of the canvas bag, and he was breathing very slowly the way a man breathes when he is trying to hold a large and difficult feeling still inside his chest long enough to not let it break anything he was going to need in the next hour. He is on the roof, Roon said. He went up the ladder without a word. Good. Wade, don't. I am going to say it anyway. Briggs has been one of us since I was a boy. I know. He held me when my mother died, right here at this table. He bought me a beer I had not asked for, and he held the back of my neck the way my father used to hold it, and he told me that the club was going to be the thing that carried me now, because the club was family when family was gone. I have carried that one night with me for 26 years, Wade. I know you have, Roon. I was at that table too. Then you understand what I am saying. I understand exactly what you are saying. I am saying it too in my own head right now as loud as you are saying it out loud. It does not change what has to happen. It makes it worse, Roon. It makes it the worst thing I have had to do in 11 years of wearing the cut. But the thing still has to happen, and we still have to happen to it, and the first step is that Briggs is on the roof because right now the roof is where I need him to be. Roon was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right. On the phone, Maren Brennan had not said anything during the exchange between Wade and Roon. She had been listening. When Roon finally went quiet, her voice came through the speaker one more time, low and even. Wade? Yeah. I am about half a mile from your fence. I am going to hang up in a minute because I need both hands free for the last stretch. There is a section of ground between the orchard and your back fence that does not have a good line of sight from the road. I am going to come up along that section, and I am going to come in through the gap behind your generator shed. I am going to knock on the back door of the clubhouse the same way my son knocked on the front door of it, except I am going to knock twice and then once more, so you know it is me. Understood? Before I hang up, there is one more thing I need to tell you, and I need to tell you before I am standing in front of you because I am not sure I am going to be able to say it to your face. Go ahead. 6 years ago, about 2 months before Roderick Hollister disappeared, you started noticing things about him that were not adding up. You mentioned it once to Rune in the back office of this clubhouse. You said Rook was making phone calls from outside the building that he should have been making from inside the building. You said Rook was asking questions about meetings he had no reason to ask about. You said, and I am quoting you here because I have listened to the recording of the conversation many times, you said, I don't know what he is, but he is not what he was. Do you remember saying that, Wade? Wade Thornton went very, very still. Yeah, he said after a long moment. I remember. Rook was making those phone calls to a field office in Sacramento. He was asking those questions because a federal agent was asking them through him. Rook was not stealing from the Iron Serpents in the final months he was with you. Rook was building a file on the Iron Serpents for a handler he had agreed to work for in exchange for a deal he was never going to get. He was an informant, Wade, an unreliable one. His handler was going to walk away from him by the end of that year. Rook knew it. Rook decided to disappear before the handler could make the decision for him. He took the $80,000 because he wanted to punish you for being the one man in the chapter who had started to see him clearly. He made sure Briggs told you it was about the money. He wanted you to hate him for a reason that was smaller than the real reason, because the real reason was that you had started to notice, and Rook was the kind of man who could not tolerate being noticed by a man he respected. That is why he did not kill you, Wade. That is why he did not arrange for you to have a heart attack in 2021 the way he arranged it for your other member. Rook left you alive and angry about the wrong thing because keeping you confused was sweeter to him than killing you would have been. Wade was staring at the phone on the table. I chose the Iron Serpents, Maren said. Not because you were the biggest chapter in the valley, although you were. Not because you were the most feared, although you were. I chose the Iron Serpents because Roderick Hollister was afraid of exactly one person in the world, and that person was the man in the photograph in the middle of the stack with the scar above his left eye. I needed somebody Rook was afraid of. I needed somebody whose voice would change his calculations when he heard it on a cold night in a parking lot he did not control. Everybody else I looked at Rook had bought or threatened or turned. You were the only one he had been running from. So I came to you. I came through your front door in the smallest and quietest way I could come through it, which was through an 8-year-old boy with a dead flashlight. I am sorry about the boy, Wade. I am sorry I could not think of a softer way. I have been telling myself for 2 years that I would apologize to you out loud for that when the moment came, and the moment is coming, and I am saying it now because I want you to hear it before the rest of tonight happens. Wade Thornton did not say anything for a very long time. Then he put his hand flat on the table palm, down next to the phone. Maren, yes, you did not need to apologize for the boy. I did. He walked 4 miles in November with no shoes on. He walked 4 miles in November to save his sister. He is going to carry that for the rest of his life, and he is going to carry it as a thing he is proud of because the mother who raised him taught him what to do when the bad thing happened, and he did it, and it worked. That is not a thing to be sorry for. That is the kind of thing a mother gets to keep. The line was quiet for a second. Then Maren's voice came back a little thinner than it had been. Wade. Yeah, thank you. You come in through the back, 2 knocks and 1. Rune will be at the door. I am going to be with the kids. All right. Maren. Yes. You were right about me, about what I said to Rune 6 years ago, about Rook. I never told anybody else I had said it. I had almost forgotten I had said it. You did your homework. I did my homework for 2 years, Wade. It is the only reason any of us is still alive. The line clicked off. Wade Thornton set the phone down on the long wooden table and looked across the main room at the 2 small shapes on the couch under the wool blanket, and for a long moment he did not move. Then he stood up and walked slowly over to the couch and knelt down beside it on one knee, the way a man kneels in front of a thing he has decided very quietly is now his job to protect, for however long his protecting of it is going to matter. Silas Brennan was asleep with his cheek pressed against his sister's hair. His bandaged feet were tucked up under the blanket. Somewhere during the last 30 minutes, somebody had pulled a pair of thick wool socks over the gauze on his feet. Men's socks, much too big, rolled down at the tops and folded over at the ankles so they would stay put. Wade looked at the socks for a long moment. He did not ask who had put them there. Nobody in the clubhouse had said anything when they had been put there, and nobody was going to say anything later. He just looked at the socks, and then he looked at the sleeping face of the boy above them, and then he reached out, and as gently as he could, with a hand the size of a catcher's mitt, he adjusted the edge of the blanket so that it covered the tops of the socks as well. He stood back up. He walked back to the long wooden table. Rune was waiting for him there. "What now?" Rune said. "Now we wait. She is coming in through the back in about 35 minutes. Rook will be a few minutes behind her, give or take. Kate is watching the front. Briggs is on the roof. You and I are going to be standing at the front door when the pickup truck comes up that road. And the woman is going to be wherever she decides to be. I am not making that call for her. She did not come all this way on a plan I built. She came on a plan she built. The plan is hers. I am a tool she picked up along the way, and I am a willing tool, and I am going to do what she tells me to do for the next hour because the plan is working, and I have no better plan to put in its place." Rune nodded slowly. Out the front window of the clubhouse, the farm road was still empty. The single yellow bulb above the front door was still burning. The Harleys in the lot were still lined up in their angled row chrome, dull now in the pre-dawn stillness, the edge of knives gone soft in the cold. 26 minutes later, there was a soft knock at the back door. 2 knocks and then 1. Rune Callahan opened the door. Maren Brennan was standing on the small concrete stoop behind the clubhouse in the dark. Her jacket was torn at the left shoulder where the metal of the van door had caught it. There was a thin scrape along the side of her jaw. Her running shoes were soaked through and black with mud to the laces. Her dark brown hair was half out of the ponytail she had tied it into 7 hours ago in a kitchen that did not exist anymore. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold and from the walk, and her breath was coming a little quicker than she had probably wanted it to be coming when she arrived, and her hands were at her sides empty. She looked up at Rune Callahan. "Sergeant, ma'am, may I come in and see my children?" Rune stepped aside without a word. Maren walked into the clubhouse. She did not stop to take off her jacket. She did not stop to look at the long wooden table, or the canvas bag, or the 2 USB drives sitting next to the bag, or the photographs still spread across the wood. She walked straight across the main room to the couch in the corner under the window, and she knelt down on the floor in front of the couch, and she put one hand on her son's shoulder and the other hand on her daughter's cheek, and she did not wake them up. She just knelt there on the floor, and she looked at them, and she breathed. Wade Thornton stood about 10 feet away and watched her do it. He did not interrupt her. He did not say anything. He just stood there, and he watched a woman kneel in front of her sleeping children in the corner of the clubhouse of the Iron Serpents at a little after 4 in the morning on a cold Thursday in November. And he thought, not for the first time in his life, but in a way he had not thought in a long time, about the shape of the world and the kind of people it sometimes asked to carry the worst of it. After about 2 minutes, Maren stood up. She walked over to the long wooden table. She looked down at the photographs. She looked down at the canvas bag. She looked down at the 2 USB drives. Then she looked up at Wade. "He's close." "Yeah." "How long?" 15 minutes, maybe less. Briggs is on the roof." "I heard." "Did you know before you called that he was going to be the one?" "I suspected." "I did not know for certain until I heard his voice on the other end of the line when you all went quiet. The way he breathed. You can tell a lot about a man from the way he breathes when he knows he has been seen." Wade looked at her for a long moment. "You are a dangerous person, Maren." "I know what I am, Wade. I am not saying it as a bad thing." "I know you're not. I am just telling you I already know what I am. I had a long time to figure it out. It is all right. I made my peace with it in a kitchen a long time ago, on a night when my daughter was 1 year old, and I was feeding her a bottle at 2 in the morning, and I realized that the man I had been working for was the kind of man he was. I knew that night what I was going to have to become if I wanted to finish him. I have been becoming it ever since. Tonight is the last night of becoming it. After tonight, I am going to be something else again, something quieter, and I am looking forward to it. But right now, until the sun comes up, I am this. Wade nodded. Right. When he pulls up, Maren said, I am going out to the fence with you. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. He might still have one move I can't see. Men like him always do. He has no moves left, Wade. I spent 2 years taking the moves away from him. The only move he has left is the move of standing in front of me and realizing what has been happening to him. And that is the move I need to see his face while he makes. I earned it. I am going out there. Wade did not argue with her. From the couch in the corner, Silas Brennan stirred slightly under the wool blanket. His eyes did not open. His hand moved across the blanket until it found his sister's small hand, and the two hands locked together the way they had been locking together since Hazel was 2 days old, and Silas had been 4 years old, and had sat next to her in the hospital nursery for the very first time. Maren looked at her children one more time. Then she turned back to Wade. Give me a minute to put myself together. Then we go. She walked into the small bathroom at the back of the clubhouse. Wade heard the water run. He heard the soft sound of a paper towel being pulled from a dispenser. He heard her wash her face, and he heard her retie her ponytail, and he heard her do the 10 or 15 small things a woman does when she is getting ready to walk out into a cold parking lot at 4:30 in the morning to finish something she has been carrying for 2 years. While she was in the bathroom, Rune came up beside Wade and spoke very quietly. Wade, yeah, that woman is going to win this. I know she is. I have never seen anybody do what she just did. Not in 30 years of riding. Not in any room I have ever been in. She walked into this clubhouse tonight, and she made all of us part of a plan we did not know was running, and she did it while her kids were in a trunk, and she was tied up in the back of a van, and she was not wrong about a single piece of it. Not one piece, Wade. Every single thing she said was going to happen happened. I have been sitting here for the last 45 minutes, and I have been watching a woman I never met run the cleanest operation I have ever witnessed in my life. And the strangest thing about it is that she has not raised her voice once. Not one time. Women like her don't raise their voices, Rune. Apparently not. The bathroom door opened. Maren came out. Her hair was back in a tight, clean ponytail. Her face was washed. The mud was gone from her hands. The scrape on her jaw was still visible, a thin red line in the bad fluorescent light, but she had pressed a cool cloth to it, and the blood had stopped. She walked straight to Wade and stopped in front of him. I'm ready. From outside, somewhere down the farm road in the direction of the county seat, the sound of a diesel engine began to grow. It was faint at first, the kind of sound you almost did not notice. The kind of sound a man who has lived near a farm road for 30 years hears all day long without thinking about it. Then it resolved into the specific low rumble of a pickup truck being driven slowly up a rural railroad in the dark, and then it got closer, and then it got closer still. And then through the front window of the clubhouse, 2 headlights came around the bend, about half a mile out, and began their slow approach across the flat November ground. Wade Thornton looked out the window. Then he looked at the woman standing next to him. He's here. I know. Last chance to stay inside with your kids. Wade, yeah. I have been waiting for this night for 2 years. I am not going to watch it through a window. And Wade Thornton, the president of the Iron Serpents, a man who had spent 11 years making every decision in that clubhouse himself, nodded once at Maren Brennan and walked to the closet by the front door to take down his cut for what was going to be one of the last times he would ever put it on. By the time the headlights came up the farm road, the sky over the eastern ridge had not yet started to turn. It was still the blackest hour of the night, the hour when the cold sits deepest in the chest and the body forgets that morning is a thing that exists. 4:30 in the morning, give or take a minute. The wind had dropped. The crows in the far field had not yet begun to stir. The world was holding its breath the way the world sometimes does right before something happens, that it will spend a long time afterward trying to forget. Inside the clubhouse, Maren Brennan stood at the long wooden table with her hands flat on the wood and her shoulders squared, and she looked like a woman who had come a very long way to be exactly where she was standing. Her jacket was torn at the left shoulder. There was a thin scrape along the side of her jaw, where a branch had caught her during the run through the irrigation ditches. Her running shoes, the ones she had left by the back door of her own house 7 hours ago, were soaked through to the socks. Somebody Kade the prospect probably had set a mug of coffee on the table near her elbow. She had not touched it. She had been looking at the canvas bag and at the 2 USB drives beside the bag and at the photographs laid out across the wood, and for 3 full minutes, she had not said a word. Then the headlights swept across the front window. Wade Thornton looked up from where he was sitting on the arm of the couch next to the 2 sleeping children. He did not say anything. Maren did not say anything either, but something passed between them in that silence. A decision that had already been made. A handoff of authority that had never been argued about because there had never been anything to argue about in the first place. "He's here," Maren said. Quiet, certain. "Yeah." Wade stood up. He looked down at Silas, who was curled against his sister under the wool blanket, with his eyes finally closed, his small hand still resting on Hazel's shoulder, even in sleep. Wade reached out with one thick finger, and as gently as a man who had spent a lifetime breaking things can do anything, he brushed a piece of hair off the boy's forehead. Then he walked to the closet by the front door and took down his cut. The old leather vest with the iron Serpents patch on the back, the one he had been wearing since he was 21 years old. He pulled it on over his jacket. He zipped nothing. He settled the weight of it on his shoulders the way a man settles the weight of a thing he has carried for so long that the carrying has become a part of his spine. Maren walked to the door and stood beside him. "I told you I was coming out there with you. I heard you the first time. Then don't try to talk me out of it again." "I wasn't going to." He reached past her and pulled the door open. The lot outside was still. The single yellow bulb above the door was still burning. Out past the chain-link fence, past the row of parked Harleys, a dark pickup truck had pulled onto the shoulder of the farm road about 200 yards from the clubhouse. Its engine was running. Then the engine cut off and the headlights cut off a second later, and for a long moment the truck sat there in the dark like an animal deciding whether to come closer. Then 3 doors opened. 2 men got out of the passenger side. Big men, the kind of big that comes from bad gyms and worse choices. Both of them had their hands close to their waistbands. Both of them were watching the clubhouse the way men watch a door they expect something to come out of. The third man got out of the driver's side. He was tall. He was thin in the way a whip is thin, which is not the same thing as weak. He moved with the unhurried confidence of a man who had been in control of rooms and streets and situations for a very long time and expected, without even thinking about it, to stay in control for a little while longer. Even from 200 yards away in the bad light, Wade Thornton recognized the walk. Rook Hollister, 6 years in the ground, still standing on his own 2 feet, still walking like he owned whatever ground he was walking on. Up on the roof of the clubhouse flat against the tar paper with a rifle resting on a folded jacket in front of him, a man named Briggs Holloway lay very still. He had been up there for the last 30 minutes. He had climbed the back ladder in silence right after Roon had dragged him out of the clubhouse and put the question to him and listened to his answer. Wade had stood there the whole time with his arms folded and his face unreadable. And when Briggs had finished telling the truth about what he had done 6 years ago with $80,000 and a man he should not have trusted, Wade had looked at him for a long moment and then said very quietly one sentence. "You owe this club a debt. You are going to pay it tonight, and you are going to pay it with everything you have. And if you live through the paying, we will talk about the rest." Briggs had nodded. He had not argued. He had taken the rifle and gone up the ladder without a word, because there was nothing else left to say, and no other way left to say it. Now from 200 yards up and behind the front line, Briggs Holloway put his eye to the scope and tracked the first of the 2 gunmen by the truck and waited. Wade and Maren walked across the gravel lot together. They did not walk fast. They did not walk slow. They walked the way 2 people walk who have already agreed on where they are going and are not going to be surprised by anything that happens when they get there. Wade was half a step behind Maren's left shoulder, not leading, not following, flanking her the way a man flanks a commanding officer in a situation that has not yet resolved itself. At the gap in the chain-link fence, Maren stopped. Rook Hollister was waiting on the other side about 20 feet away, with his hands in the pockets of a dark wool coat and an expression on his face that Wade had seen on him 100 times in the old days. It was the expression Rook wore when he was about to offer a deal he thought was very clever. It was the expression of a man who believed he had more moves on the board than the person across from him, and who was looking forward to the pleasure of explaining this. Then Rook saw Maren standing next to Wade. His face did not change, not in a way most people would have noticed. The corner of his mouth stayed exactly where it had been. The angle of his head did not shift, but something at the back of his eyes moved half a step sideways, the way a horse's ear will twitch at a sound the rider cannot yet hear. And Maren saw it, and Wade saw it, and both of them understood in the same instant what they had just witnessed. Roderick Hollister had not expected to see her standing there. He had expected her to still be tied to a folding chair in a storage unit off Route 9. He had expected to arrive at this clubhouse with all the leverage still in his pocket, the woman still secured the children, still the only card Wade needed to care about. He had expected to do this negotiation the way he had done every other negotiation in his life, which was from a position where the person across the table knew there was a knife at a throat somewhere off stage. Instead, the knife had walked itself out of the storage unit. The knife was standing in front of him. The knife was looking at him with the calm, tired eyes of a woman who had spent 2 years building this exact moment in her kitchen at night while her children slept. For the first time in a very long time, Rook Hollister did not know what the next sentence was going to be. Maren spoke first. "Hello, Roderick." "Maren, you look surprised." "I look like a man who has had a long night." "We've all had a long night." He took one step closer to the fence, just one. His 2 gunmen by the truck took a matching step forward, and from up on the roof, Briggs Holloway shifted his rifle a 1/4 inch to the right and kept breathing the slow, shallow breath of a man waiting to be told to pull a trigger. Rook stopped at the fence line. He looked past Maren at Wade. He tried the smile one more time, the old one, the easy one. "Hatchet. Don't call me that. It's your name." "It's a name a friend gave me a long time ago. You are not that friend." Rook nodded slowly as if this was fair, as if he was not a man standing on cold gravel at 4:30 in the morning. With every plan, he had walked in with quietly catching fire behind his eyes. "I came here to make a deal," he said. "I figured. I still think we can make one." Wade did not answer. He just waited. Rook looked at Maren, then back at Wade. 48 hours of club protection, safe passage out of the state, 50,000 in bakshish. In exchange, every copy of every file in that bag disappears. I disappear. You never hear from me again. The men in those photographs never know any of this happened. Your club walks away with its own name off the paperwork. Your sergeant walks away. Your dead friend from 2 years ago stays dead, and nobody digs him up for a federal hearing. You get your life back, Wade, the one you had before tonight. I'm the only person in the world who can give that to you, and I am standing right here offering it. Wade did not say anything for a long moment. Maren did. Where are the men you brought with you, Roderick, besides the 2 by the truck? Rook's smile flickered just slightly. There's nobody else. You came with 3 vehicles to my house tonight. The SUV, the van, and a panel truck that hung back about a 1/4 mile. I saw the panel truck in the side mirror when we pulled out of my driveway. Where did it go? Maren. Where did it go, Roderick? I don't discuss operational details in the middle of a negotiation. You don't have anyone in that panel truck anymore. Rook's jaw tightened. Excuse me, you don't have anyone in that panel truck, Maren said again. Very calm, very steady. And the reason you don't have anyone in that panel truck is that the 2 men who were riding in it tonight were pulled over at a gas station 11 miles from here about 40 minutes ago by 4 people in plain clothes with federal credentials. One of the 2 was your driver. The other was the man you sent to watch the access road from the east. They are both currently sitting handcuffed in the back of a Bureau vehicle parked behind a feed store on Route 14. I know this because the woman who made the arrest called me 9 minutes ago on the phone I am carrying in my pocket. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that happens when a man hears a door close behind him that he did not know was open. Rook Hollister looked at Maren Brennan the way a man looks at the first small hairline crack in something he had believed to be solid all the way through. Who, he said very quietly, are you? I was your forensic accountant for 3 years, Roderick. I had 4 different accountants in those years. You had 5, you forgot 1. I don't forget people. You forgot me because you hired me through a subcontractor out of Sacramento, and I only ever signed off on the shell company paperwork for the equipment leasing side of your operation. You never met me. You never saw my face. You saw my signature on 6 pages of filings in 2019, and you assumed the name belonged to a man because you only ever assumed that names belong to men. I sat across the hallway from your office in the annex building in Modesto for 14 months, and you walked past me twice a day, and you never once looked at me because I was a woman in reading glasses and a cardigan, and that is the uniform of a person who cannot hurt you. Rook's face had gone very still. I started recording you, Maren said, in the spring of 2020, not because I knew what I was going to do with the recordings, because you said something in the hallway one afternoon to another man about a name I recognized, and I wanted to know what I had heard. Then I heard something else. Then I heard something else. And by the end of that year, I had more than I knew what to do with, and I made a decision that took me 2 more years to act on. Do you want to know what the decision was? Tell me. I decided that I was not going to let you be a man who gets away with things. She took a half step closer to the fence. Wade did not move. He was letting her work. He had been letting her work for the last 40 minutes ever since the first phone call, and he had come to understand somewhere along the way that this was not a negotiation he was going to run. This was her table. He was here to make sure nobody flipped it over. The files in that bag, Maren said, were never the weapon. The files in that bag were the bait. I put the files in that bag because I knew you would come for them, and I knew you would believe you still had leverage as long as you still had the files, and I knew you would bring yourself across 4 counties in a truck. You drove yourself, and I knew you would stand in front of a group of men who could testify to your face and your voice and your presence on this ground at this hour tonight. I did not need the files, Roderick. I had never needed the files. The files were a letter I wrote to draw you out of the hole you have been sitting in for 6 years. Then what Rook said is the weapon. The weapon is on the table inside that clubhouse. She pointed past him with one finger. Not at him, through him, at the building behind her. There is a second USB drive that I asked the sergeant at arms to retrieve from under the driver's seat of the car you abandoned in the ditch. He retrieved it half an hour ago. I have had it on me for 3 years, and I left it in that car tonight because I wanted it to be inside the clubhouse when you arrived, and I wanted you to know when this moment came that the drive was there and that you were looking at a woman who knew exactly what was on it and had already sent copies of it to 3 people you cannot touch. The drive contains 41 hours of audio recordings. It contains 11 of those hours of you speaking in your own voice in your own office at your own desk about 4 separate homicides that you ordered between 2017 and 2021. It contains the recording of you on the night of April 14th, 2021, telling a man named Carl Meacham exactly how you wanted a certain witness removed from a certain hearing. Carl Meacham is currently serving 26 years in Lompoc for the killing that came out of that conversation. He has been asking for someone to talk to for about 18 months. Starting next week, he is going to get his wish. Rook Hollister did not move. His hands were still in the pockets of his dark coat. His shoulders were still square. From the outside, he looked like the same man who had stepped out of the pickup truck 2 minutes ago. But the 2 gunmen behind him had taken half a step back. They had not been told to. Their bodies had done it on their own because the bodies of men who work for other men are very good at reading the wind. And the wind in that parking lot had just changed direction. You are bluffing, Rook said. No. You are bluffing because if you had those recordings, you would have taken them to the FBI years ago. I did take them to the FBI. The corner of Maren Brennan's mouth moved. It was not a smile. It was the thing that happens to a mouth when the person behind it has been waiting a very long time to say the next sentence. I took them to a woman named Linnea Whitfield. From the shadows on the far side of the farm road, on the opposite side from the pickup truck, a figure stepped out onto the shoulder of the gravel. She had been there the entire time. Nobody in the parking lot had seen her. Nobody had known to look. She was a tall woman in her late 40s with short gray streaked hair and a dark windbreaker with no insignia on it, and she walked out of the dark without hurrying and without making a sound. And behind her, emerging from 2 different positions along the same tree line, came 4 other figures in matching dark jackets. 2 of them had rifles resting across their forearms. One of them was carrying a shotgun at a low ready. The fourth was speaking quietly into a radio. Rook turned his head slowly the way a man turns his head when he already knows what he is going to see. Linnea, Roderick, you look older. I earned it every year of it looking for you. Linnea Whitfield walked out to the middle of the road and stopped about 15 feet from the pickup truck, and her four people fanned out around her in a shape that was not quite a circle and not quite a line, but was doing the geometric work of both. Another engine sounded in the distance, and then another, and then a third, and then headlights, 3 sets of them, swept up the farm road from the direction of the county seat and pulled into slow, disciplined positions along the shoulder. Unmarked sedans, federal plates. The 2 gunmen by Rook's truck looked at each other. One of them very slowly put his hands out to his sides, palms forward away from his waistband. The other one was a little slower to make the same decision, and for a second it looked like he might not make it at all. And then from the roof of the clubhouse, a single red dot flickered onto the center of his chest and held there. And the second man found his hands very quickly after that. Linnea Whitfield did not raise her voice. Roderick Hollister, you are under arrest on federal charges, including murder for hire, conspiracy to obstruct justice, witness intimidation, and the attempted abduction of 2 minors across county lines. You are going to turn around. You are going to place your hands on the hood of your own truck. You are going to do this slowly, and if at any point in the next 10 seconds you make me believe, even for half a second, that you are reaching for anything in those coat pockets other than nothing at all, the man on the roof of that clubhouse is going to end this night for you, and he is not going to feel bad about it in the morning. Rook Hollister stood very still for a long moment. Then slowly, with the care of a man whose hands have become in the last 2 minutes the most important things he owns, he pulled them out of his coat pockets. He held them away from his sides. He turned around. He walked 3 steps to his own truck. He placed his palms flat on the cold metal of the hood. He did not look at Maren. He did not look at Wade. He did not look at anything at all. 2 of Linnea Whitfield's people came forward with cuffs. Maren Brennan watched the man she had spent 2 years pulling toward this cold patch of gravel get his wrist bound behind his back, and her face did not change. There was no smile of triumph. There was no release of breath. There was only the expression of a woman watching the last number in a long column of numbers finally add up correctly the way she had always known it would if she had just been patient enough and quiet enough and careful enough for long enough. Then she did something she had been promising herself privately that she would do if she ever got the chance. She walked through the gap in the chain link fence. She walked across the gravel shoulder. She walked right up to the back of the pickup truck where Roderick Hollister stood with his hands cuffed behind him and his face turned away from her. The agents around him did not stop her. Linnea Whitfield did not stop her. Wade Thornton, standing back by the fence with his arms folded, did not stop her. Maren stopped about 1 foot from Rook's shoulder. He did not turn his head. Roderick. He did not answer. Look at me. Slowly he turned his head. She was not speaking loudly. Her voice did not carry beyond the 2 of them. If you had been standing by the fence, you would have seen her lips move, and you would have seen his face, and you would have understood something was being said that was not for you. You put tape on my daughter's mouth, Maren said. You locked her in the trunk of a car in November. You were going to leave her there. Rook said nothing. You told my son it was a game. You gave him 1 hour to walk 4 miles in the cold with no shoes on. Rook said nothing. I'm going to tell you something now. Roderick and I want you to carry it with you for every single day of what comes next. I am not going to tell anyone I told you this. I am not going to put it on the record. It is a thing just between us. Are you listening? Rook's eyes flickered. He was listening. The recording from the night you ordered the Meacham killing is not the worst one on that drive. There is a recording from 11 months later that is worse. You know which one I mean. You made that call from your car on the 99 north of Merced. You thought the car was clean. It was not clean. I had put a device in the wheel well 2 weeks earlier during the time you thought I was on vacation, and I captured every word of that call, and that recording alone is going to get you a second life sentence without the possibility of parole in a federal facility that does not have a yard you are going to want to walk in. You are going to spend the next 40 years in a room with 1 window, and every day when the light comes through that window, I want you to remember that a woman in reading glasses and a cardigan walked past you in a hallway in Modesto for 14 months, and you did not see her. Not once, and that is the reason you are where you are. Not because I was smarter than you, because you were the kind of man who did not look. She took one step back. Rook Hollister opened his mouth. He closed it again. There was nothing there to say. The agents took him by the elbows and walked him to the back of one of the federal sedans, and they put their hands on the top of his head the way they do, and they guided him into the back seat, and the door closed, and that was the last time in Maren Brennan's life that she ever saw Roderick Hollister with her own eyes. She stood on the shoulder of the farm road for a moment with her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. Then Wade Thornton came up beside her. He did not touch her. He just stood there, a little behind her left shoulder, the way he had been standing the whole night. You all right? I've been all right for 2 years, Wade. I've been waiting. Yeah, I can see that. She turned and looked up at him. There was a long, quiet moment between them, the kind of moment that does not need words and does not work if you try to put words in it. And then she nodded once and he nodded back, and the two of them walked together across the gravel toward the clubhouse, where two small children were still asleep under a wool blanket on a couch in the corner of a room that was about to stop being the room it had been for the last 30 years. The light came up over the eastern ridge about 40 minutes later. By the time it did, the federal agents had swept the clubhouse with the cold efficiency of people who had been building a case for a very long time and did not need to be told what they were looking at. They did not tear the place apart. They took the canvas bag. They took both USB drives. They took photographs of photographs. They took statements from each of the Iron Serpents, who was present one at a time, in the small back office where the chapter had kept its books for 3 decades. Rune Callahan went first. Briggs Holloway, who had come down from the roof with the rifle slung over his back, went second, and Wade did not tell the federal agents anything about what Briggs had confessed to earlier in the night, and neither did Rune and neither did anyone else, because the debt Briggs was going to pay to the club was not a debt the federal government had any business collecting on. Wade Thornton went last. He sat across from Linnea Whitfield in the small back office at a desk that had a coffee ring burned into the wood and a framed photograph on the wall of the founding members of the Iron Serpents from 1987. He folded his hands on the desk. He looked at Linnea across the top of them. I don't need a lawyer, he said. You should have one anyway. I know what's on this drive. I know what it means for me. I have known since I saw the photograph with my face in it 5 hours ago. I am not going to ask you to make any of this go easier on me than it deserves to go. I am going to tell you what I did, and I am going to tell you when I did it, and I am going to tell you who else was in the room when I did it, and you are going to do whatever you are going to do with that information, and I am going to go where I am going to go. I want one thing. Linnea Whitfield waited. I want those kids' mother kept out of the file for my sentencing. She doesn't get mentioned by name in any paperwork that touches my case. She doesn't testify. She does not come within 100 miles of whatever courtroom I end up in. Everything she did tonight, she did for her own kids, and she does not need the rest of her life defined by the fact that she had to spend one bad morning talking to me. She is going to go be a mother for 2 children who need a mother. You are going to let her. That is not entirely in my power to promise. Then make it as in your power as you can. Linnea Whitfield looked at him for a long moment across the desk. Then she nodded once the way a person nods when they have decided something and do not intend to unmake the decision later. I'll make it as in my power as I can. All right then. And Wade Thornton started to talk. He talked for 2 hours. He told her about the warehouse and the photograph. He told her about the man in the suit. He told her about 3 meetings in 2018 and 2019 that he had sat through and signed off on and gone home from without ever mentioning to anyone. He told her about 4 decisions he had made as chapter president that he had known at the time were the wrong decisions and that he had made anyway, because he had told himself the club came first, and the club came first, and the club came first, and he had told himself this so many times that eventually the words had stopped meaning anything at all. He did not cry. He did not make excuses. He did not try to make himself sound better than he was. He laid the whole thing out on the desk between himself and the woman with the short gray-streaked hair, and when he was finished, Linnea Whitfield looked at him for a long moment, and then she closed her notebook and she said very quietly, Thank you. And Wade Thornton nodded and stood up and walked out of the small back office of the clubhouse he had run for 11 years, and he did not look back at it because he already knew that the version of himself that had walked into that office was not the version of himself that was walking out. In the main room of the clubhouse, Maren Brennan was sitting on the old couch next to her children. Hazel was awake by then. She was sitting in her mother's lap with her face buried in the front of Maren's torn jacket, and Maren had both arms around her and was rocking her very slowly in a rhythm that had nothing to do with the room they were in and everything to do with the first year of Hazel's life, which Maren had spent rocking her in exactly that rhythm, on exactly that beat, in a rocking chair, in a bedroom, in a house that did not exist anymore. Silas was asleep against his mother's other side under the wool blanket, with his bandaged feet tucked up onto the cushion. Somebody had cleaned his feet at some point in the last hour. The cuts had been washed with warm water from the clubhouse kitchen and wrapped in clean gauze from a first aid kit somebody had dug out of a closet in the back office. And over the gauze, somebody had pulled a pair of thick wool socks, men's socks, way too big for an 8-year-old, rolled down at the toes and folded over at the ankles so they would not slide off. Nobody had said out loud whose socks they were. Nobody in the clubhouse ever did. Wade Thornton walked across the main room and sat down in the folding chair across from the couch. He did not say anything for a long time. He just looked at the three of them on the couch, the woman and the two children, and then he looked down at his own hands resting on his knees, and then he looked up at Maren. "They're going to indict me," he said. "I know. Probably within the month. I know. I'm going to take it. I'm not going to fight the charges. I know that too." Wade nodded slowly. "I asked her to keep you out of it, out of my file, out of the sentencing, out of anywhere your name doesn't need to be. She said she'd do what she could." Maren looked at him across the space between them. There was something in her eyes that had not been there at any other point in the night. Not fear, not triumph, something older and quieter than either of those things. "Wade, yeah. Well, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." 11 years ago on a stretch of highway about 60 miles south of here, did you stop your motorcycle on the shoulder of the road for a woman whose car had broken down in the middle of a summer afternoon? Wade's face did not move for a second. Then he frowned slightly, trying to remember. "I've stopped for a lot of broken down cars. I don't know that I remember." She had a little boy with her, about 3 years old. He was sitting in the back seat with a box of animal crackers. The radiator had overheated and she did not have any water in the car, and she did not have any cash for a tow truck. And she was very, very scared because she was 3 hours from home and she did not know anybody in the county. You stopped your motorcycle. You did not say very much. You walked up the shoulder to a gas station about half a mile away, and you came back with a gallon jug of water and a $20 bill. You poured the water into the radiator. You gave the $20 to the woman in case she needed to stop for gas on the rest of the drive home. You told her to be careful. Then you got on your motorcycle and you rode away. You did not ask her name. Wade was staring at her. "The boy in the back seat with the animal crackers," Maren said, "was not Silas. Silas was not born yet. The boy was my sister's son. I was driving him home from a visit. I was 23 years old. I had just lost a job I had needed very badly. I was about 2 weeks away from the lowest moment I had ever had in my life, and I was sitting in a dead car on the side of a road in the valley, and a man on a motorcycle who had every reason in the world not to stop stopped and fixed the car and gave me $20 I had not asked for and left." Wade's jaw worked. He did not say anything. "I remembered the scar over your left eye," Maren said. "I remembered it for 11 years. I did not know your name. I did not know anything about you except that you rode with a club and that you had a patch on your vest that said Hatchet on it. When I started looking 2 years ago for a group of men who could help me finish the thing I had started, I thought of you before I thought of anybody else. I told myself it was because the Iron Serpents were the only chapter in the valley big enough to do what I needed done. But that was not really the reason, Wade. The reason was that I had been carrying around for 11 years the memory of a very large man on the side of a road who stopped for a stranger he did not know and then rode away without asking her name. And I had decided, without ever saying it out loud to myself, that if I was ever in a situation where I needed to trust one man in the world, it was going to be that man. I am telling you this now because I want you to know that I did not choose you because you were useful. I chose you because a long time ago on a summer afternoon, you were the kind of person who stopped. Wade Thornton looked down at his hands in his lap for a very long time. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet. Not crying, just wet in the corners the way an old man's eyes get wet when something finds him that he had not known was still reachable. Yeah, he said very quietly. I remember the car. The radiator was all rusted out around the cap. I remember thinking it was going to blow the first time the driver hit a real hill. It did. About 50 miles later, I had to call my sister to come get us. I figured it would. Maren smiled. It was a small, tired smile. It was the first smile anybody had seen on her face in a very long time. Thank you for the $20, Wade. You're welcome, ma'am. And that was all they said to each other on that subject then or ever. Wade Thornton served 14 months in a federal facility in Lompoc. He did not fight the charges at Dar's plea hearing. He did not cooperate against any other member of the Iron Serpents in any way that would have reduced his time. The charges he took were the ones attached to his own name in the paperwork and no more. His attorney, a public defender with too many cases and not enough sleep, told him twice that he was making a mistake, that he could be out in 6 months instead of 14 if he would just sit down with the prosecutor and talk about what he knew about the 3 meetings in 2018. And Wade told his attorney both times that the subject was closed. He did his 14 months quietly. He worked in the prison library. He read more books in that year than he had read in the previous 30. He lost 15 pounds because the food was terrible, and he did not complain about it. When his sentence was up, he walked out of the gate in Lompoc with a cardboard box containing everything he owned in the world, and he did not go back to the valley. He did not go back to the clubhouse. He did not go back to anything. The chapter was disbanded 11 months after his release as part of a larger federal sweep that also took down 2 judges, 5 law enforcement officers, 3 county officials, and 4 other members of the Iron Serpents from adjacent chapters. The clubhouse at the edge of the farm road was seized by the federal government and sold at auction to a man from Bakersfield who turned it into a tire shop. The single yellow bulb over the front door was replaced by a fluorescent sign that said "Open" in red letters. The long wooden table where the chapter had met for 30 years was sold off to a bar in Visalia. The bar still has it. You can drink a beer on it if you know where to look. The story of the night ran on the front page of 3 newspapers within 10 days of the arrests. Linnea Whitfield wrote the piece for the paper that took the lead byline. Her name on the article was Linnea Whitfield, former federal special agent, currently independent investigative journalist. She did not mention in the piece that she had been removed from her position at the Bureau 4 years earlier for pursuing Roderick Hollister too aggressively with too little institutional support. She did not mention that her own brother had been killed by Hollister in 2019 in a hit that had been made to look like a rival club's work. Those facts came out later in a longer piece she wrote for a magazine 6 months after the indictments. By then, it did not matter. By then, Roderick Hollister was already being processed for transfer to a federal facility with 1 window per cell and a yard that, as Maren Brennan had predicted on the shoulder of the farm road, he would not want to walk in. Maren Brennan and her 2 children moved out of the state 3 weeks after the arrests. She did not tell anyone where they were going. Not Linnea Whitfield, not the federal agents who had taken her statement, not Wade Thornton, who was by then already in custody awaiting his hearing. They settled in a small town in a different state, in a house with a yard that had a single old oak tree in it, in a kitchen window that looked out on a field that was empty in the winter and full of wildflowers in the summer. Maren got a job doing forensic accounting for a federal prosecutor's office. The prosecutor she worked for did not know at first who she was or what she had done because Maren had not told anyone who she had been. She just did the work. She did it quietly. She did it well. After about a year, the prosecutor figured out on her own that the woman in the cardigan who sat at the desk by the window had been the woman in the newspaper articles, and she walked into Maren's office one afternoon and closed the door and asked if it was true. Maren said yes. The prosecutor asked if she wanted to talk about it. Maren said no. The prosecutor nodded and said all right and left and never brought it up again. Silas Brennan is 16 years old now. He does not talk about that night. He does not talk about the clubhouse or the farm road or the dark pickup truck or the tall, thin man in the dark wool coat. His sister Hazel, who is 13 now, does not remember any of it at all. Maren made a decision very early on not to tell Hazel about the trunk. She decided that Hazel had lived through something no 5-year-old should live through, and that the kindest thing she could do as a mother was let Hazel forget it, and so Hazel forgot the way 5-year-olds can forget things if nobody reminds them. Hazel remembers a wool blanket on an old couch. She remembers a man with a beard giving her crackers. Those are good memories. She keeps them. In the back of Silas Brennan's closet, under a stack of school notebooks on the top shelf, there is a pair of thick wool socks. Men's socks. Way too big for the 16-year-old feet they belong to now, and way too big for the 8-year-old feet they had been pulled onto in the small hours of a November morning in a clubhouse that no longer exists. Silas has never worn those socks. He has never thrown them away. He does not talk about them, and if you asked him why he keeps them, he would probably shrug and say he does not know. That would not be the whole truth. Once a year on the anniversary of that night, a single motorcycle pulls into the parking lot of the tire shop on the edge of the farm road. The rider is a large man with a gray beard and a scar that runs up from his left eye into his hairline. He does not go inside. He does not talk to the people who work there. He parks the bike in front of where the door used to be. He sits on it for a few minutes with the engine off, and he looks at the building. Then he starts the bike up and rides away. The people who work at the tire shop have no idea who he is. They do not know what happened in that building before it was theirs. To them, he is just a quiet old biker who shows up once a year and leaves without buying anything. And they have decided, in the way small communities decide these things, that he is probably harmless, and there is probably a story there, and it is not any of their business to ask what it is. That same week, every year, a small package arrives at a post office box in the valley. The post office box does not belong to Wade Thornton. Wade does not have a mailing address anyone can reliably find. The post office box belongs to a man in Bakersfield who used to ride with the Iron Serpents a long time ago, and who still keeps an eye on things for old friends. He collects the package and he delivers it in person to Wade, wherever Wade is living that year, which is usually a small rented room above a garage somewhere, or a cabin out past the edge of a county line. The package never has a return address. It does not need one. Wade knows who it is from. Inside the package is a single pair of thick wool socks. They are brand new. They are men's socks size 12, the heavy winter kind that hikers buy for cold weather. They are never accompanied by a note. They do not need to be. Wade takes them out of the package. He looks at them. For a moment, he folds them carefully and he puts them in the top drawer of whatever dresser he has in whatever room he is living in that year. By now, he has a stack of them in that drawer. More than a stack. A small, neat pile of years folded and set aside, waiting for a winter cold enough to need them. He has not worn any of them yet either. Some things you just hold on to.